we'll go ahead and get started, facing a few technical difficulties. But for now, I will be the faceless voice. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you for joining the first webinar from the newly rebranded National Homelessness Law Center. We've simplified and updated our name, so if you did not see either of our two major announcements last week, please check out our website or social media. We're really excited to have you for today's webinar, Media and Narrative Building on Homelessness and COVID-19. My name is Kariana Barr. I am the Director of Development and Communications at the Law Center, and I am so thrilled to be joined by a group of amazing speakers today. Today we have Kate Chatfield, Senior Advisor for Legislation and Policy at the Justice Collaborative, Dr. Tiffany Manuel, President and CEO of The Case Made, Mark Horvath, founder of Invisible People, and we may or may not have Theo Henderson, founder of We the Unhoused. Hopefully he'll be able to join us in a little bit. So just to get started, a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and it will be hosted on both the Law Center's website and YouTube, hopefully tomorrow. You will also receive a copy of the slides after the webinar ends. And we're saving times for questions at the end so that we can have more of a robust panel style discussion with all of our speakers. To ask questions, in your control panel for GoToWebinar, there's a line that says questions. Open that up and just type in your question. Some questions may end up being answered during the presentation. Otherwise, we will cover them during the Q&A at the end. Also, please feel free to interact and chat with others who are watching the webinar during the session on social media, especially on Twitter, tagging at NLCHP Homeless. So before we dive in with the speakers, I really want to thank you all for sharing your interest in the messaging and narrative shifts that we're facing during COVID-19. Even before this immense health crisis struck our country and the world, many of us were battling the massive, harmful narratives that have been coming from the federal administration. The statements, tweets, and official reports from our federal government have fed into long-standing tropes and stereotypes of homelessness and is using the us versus them narrative to try and divide the housed from the unhoused. We've had to pivot and adapt what we say and how we say it, and have had to both reactively and proactively build the narratives that we want our many audiences and our many stakeholders to hear. This isn't static, and the narrative building and shifting will continue. But today, I'm really excited to hear from these amazing experts on what they have done to take control of the narrative, to share some of their lessons learned, and then to speak about recommendations and what they see as necessary considerations for the future. We hope that by the end of this webinar, you will have ideas, tips, and tricks for using this moment to shape and share the narrative you want to see. Without further ado, I will hand it off to our first speaker, Kate.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me, and thank you for hosting this webinar and for inviting me to present some of the work that the Justice Collaborative has been doing in this moment to build people's awareness and consciousness. I'm sorry, there's some work going on. I have a massive plumbing issue right now, so I hope that's not too distracting. So this is, if it is, I can do this later. But at any rate, this is some of the work that we've been doing at the Justice Collaborative. So we do research, writing, and polling on these issues. So first I want to talk about the Justice Collaborative Institute. This is an independent arm of the Justice Collaborative. And this is, we have academic fellows who research issues and write reports, and we do polling in collaboration with Data for Progress on some of the issues that we are seeing around the country. And oftentimes I think that we see these issues, we see homelessness as a crisis, we see housing precarity as a crisis. It feels as if our elected leaders do not see it as the crisis that it is. It feels like many people don't see it as a crisis. So And that raises a question: is the just us? Are we crazy? You know, I mean, we see this in a particular lens, but how come nothing has been done about this issue for years and years and years? So let's do some polling on it. You know, if the electeds aren't seeing it as a crisis, are the voters, and what are voter reactions? So that sort of led to this, the Justice Collaborative Institute, where we not only want to do the academic reports, but test what do voters see, what do they want to see happen. So within these slides, and presumably these slides will be shared with you later, there are links to just some of the reports on housing that the Justice Collaborative Institute has done since COVID-19. So we wanted to see, you know, do people believe that there should be an end to homeless encampment sweeps during COVID? I mean, that's what public health experts are recommending. What are voters' feelings about that? So we polled that. Overwhelming support for just common sense steps to be taken to address these issues in light of COVID-19. We really wanted to test, we see housing as a human right. We believe that. What do voters think? Do they see that as a human right? So we did polling in California. What do California voters think? This was in conjunction with some legislation that was then in front of the California legislature. So, you know, that would declare housing to be a human right. So we did polling. We got a majority of support for that. So we wrote that report with a San Francisco supervisor and Carol Fite from Moms for Housing. So you can go on the Justice Collaborative Institute, but you can see a lot of validation from academics and from polling on what we want to see happening in our country around addressing the crisis of homelessness and housing precarity. If I could get the next slide. Yeah, so another outlet for the Justice Collaborative, we have an independent newspaper, online newspaper called The Appeal. So we pitch stories to The Appeal to see if they would be interested in covering this story. We, you know, who work in other aspects of the Justice Collaborative. So since COVID-19, this is just on these slides is just a small sampling of the stories that the Appeal has covered, because we really felt we weren't seeing this in the media at large. Things like, you know, the eviction cliff. Now it is, you know, coming to the fore, but we weren't really seeing it framed from the ground up the way that we would like to see it framed. So we pitch these stories, and Appeal writers and sometimes freelancers took pitch stories or wrote stories, and the Appeal published them. So I think on the next page there's we talked about, you know, around converting hotels. If you could go back to 2 slides. Sorry, it's the next slide. I just wanted to, sorry, the second slide on the Appeal. I thought it was on there. Is this the second Appeal slide? Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, this was it. Sorry, it was my mistake. This is an article. If I link on it, oh, I can't link on it here, but it's housing is a human right, should not be predicated on the money in one's pocket. That was an article that Paul Bowden from the Western Regional Advocacy Project is sent to Matt Ferner. It was and others. I think there were multiple authors on that, but that's a way it gives people who are on the ground organizing, seeing this from the ground up, an outlet to write and to share what they're seeing and what the policy prescriptions should be. The Appeal, it's since COVID-19, I think it's getting 1 million hits a day in various forms, whether that's from Twitter, Facebook, or just independently on their website. So that's been a great outlet for us to shape the narrative around these issues. And then I'll talk about the other project that the Appeal does with Now This News, and that's on the next slide, I think. So in addition to just reading the Appeal, we sort of came up with this concept on the briefing because we were watching, Gavin Newsom and Governor Cuomo in New York and Trump do these daily briefings, in March and April, and that was what was in the media landscape. What does Governor Cuomo say? What does Gavin Newsom say? What is Trump, going off about today? And it was like, this is not the news. Like, this is not what's happening in the real world. This is not what we want to hear and what is affecting people where they live or, in their communities where they're at. And so we created this show in conjunction with Now This, and it's live streamed. We do a show a day, sometimes multiple shows a day, with elected officials that we want to hear from, generally paired with community advocates and others to talk about the issues. And this is just a sampling of some of the issues that are some of the episodes of the briefing that we've done around homelessness and housing. A few weeks ago, we had, I guess maybe now it's a month ago, we had Elizabeth Warren paired with Carol Fife from Moms for Housing. And, Carol was one of the authors of our Housing as a Human Right. And then, and that was, they met each other on that show, and I can talk about what ended up happening from that relationship. But at any rate, that is also a way for us to get our message out about this crisis. And then if I could just see the last slide, I think this is the last one. Yeah, so we also work, we have the Justice Collaborative Action Team, and we work behind the scenes. In everything, we work behind the scenes, but we want to lift up the voices of visionary leaders that are organizing or that are getting elected. We are not the people that we want to be forward facing for the most part. We want to work behind the scenes and uplift other great work that we're seeing. So we've done some work. There was a rent strike in Oakland that we did some supportive work for. You can go back to the Appeal, and we pitched stories to the Appeal, and they broke the news that when the rent strike was happening in Oakland, we did some support for the California rent strike that's still ongoing. We did similar support with a community-based organization in New York and in Kansas City, which I don't have listed here, but to uplift the work that they're doing. And we've had elected leaders on in 5-minute, what we're calling the dispatch now, to talk about their bills to address homelessness and housing. And that's also through the Appeal and Now This. And then we do state legislative support when there's a great bill that we see, or even, a bill that's going to address this crisis. We can work behind the scenes to help amplify that. And I guess I had an updated slide. It didn't make it here, but I was going to say in last week's Washington Post, there was an op-ed from Elizabeth Warren and Carol Fife about housing and the federal bills that needed to be passed. And they also wrote about a bill in California, Nancy Skinner's SB 1079, that needed to be passed to address an impending foreclosure crisis, where hedge funds are just waiting to snatch up properties in California and raise rents and create the situation that led directly to the Moms for Housing movement. So that is also some of our work. We don't just work with the Appeal or the briefing. We're also writing and pitching to other outlets from these visionary leaders that we're seeing that are saying the right things. So that's what the Justice Collaborative does, and I'm happy to answer questions should they come up later. But thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. And now we will turn it over to Tiffany.
Great. Well, first of all, just thank you so much for everybody at the Law Center. I have long been a fan of your work. I think y'all are doing some fantastic work across the country, so I'm happy to be here to contribute to your panel today. I want to start where I hope most people are as they think about this issue, which is our nation is facing probably the worst or some of the most challenging times that we've seen in more than a generation, not just in issues of housing, but across the board. We are really being challenged and stretched, I think, to reimagine what it means to live in the communities that we live in and the circumstances under which we are going to share in the prosperity of the regions in which we live. And I would say there's no more important moment right now to be thinking about narrative because it matters so much when you have a president who is tweeting, even just today, about suburban wives not having to deal with low-income housing, and you have lots of folks across the country wondering about whether they're going to be able to pay the mortgage and the rent, and you've got all these things sort of circling around us. This moment is really important for us to be able to reshape how we think about these issues. And I guess I want to start there because I hope that you are, despite the fact that things are tough right now, I hope that folks on this call are at very least excited about the opportunity to unpack some of the dominant narratives that have just been hard for us to punch through. Like there's been this moment where, millions of people across the country who normally don't have to think about their shelter, right? Who don't have to think about how they pay their rent or mortgage, or don't have to think about how they get their kids to school every day, or don't have to think about their jobs, are being treated to a world-class education in the fact that other folks have been challenged by those issues for quite some time. They're being treated to how difficult it's been if you need to access services, how difficult it is, and it's made to be if you have to access unemployment insurance, how difficult it is to get health care, right, when you're not working at a job, right, because your health care is tied to your job. And so when people are in that moment, it's an opportunity to say, yeah, this bureaucracy has been weaponized against us. And so our opportunity is to take that back, to redesign it in a way that fosters greater equity, that allows us to have systems that are inclusive, that allows us to have systems that are explicitly anti-racist, and that allows us to have systems that actually contribute to our collective well-being, not just the well-being of some. And so I hope as you're on this call, I know things are tough, but I hope y'all are excited about the opportunity to engage people, many folks who would otherwise not be at this table having this conversation today. So let's start with my first slide. I will say, my role and responsibility as the president and CEO of the Case Made has been to help folks, to get folks into this conversation about narrative really thoughtfully. There's a lot of conversations over the last couple of years about narrative and what it means. And I would say one of the best things that's happened over the last couple of years is we've got more researchers, more folks who understand deeply what it means to have narrative function in your favor, right, have been doing a lot of work across the country. And I've been working with lots of organizations, the Funders for Housing Opportunity, as well as folks like Chane Initiative. We pulled together, even just this spring, the top sort of housing narrative researchers across the country. There are, I think, about 25 of them from different organizations across the country to talk about what it is we know from empirical data about how to shift the conversation and what matters most. So I hope to share a couple of those just really brief kind of things with you today. But the first thing I wanted to say is just let's get clear about what our narratives are supposed to do. And I use this quote by Rashad Robinson, who I think is one of the, I would say probably one of the best thinkers in the field right now on narrative. And it gives us really simple definition of narratives as helping us get clarity about our convictions, about what needs to be done, and most importantly, about how to help people access their own agency and their role in change. And the reason I underline that is because most folks, right, who are in our country are sitting at home watching headlines that look a lot like what's on the left on the screen. And as they're looking at that and feeling powerless to change what's happening around them, lots of folks, don't quite get a sense of, they don't have a sense of their own power and their own agency and their own responsibility in terms of social change. Lots of folks are cynical about our ability to really have racial equity. They're cynical about our ability to have a system that provides shelter for everybody. They're cynical about our ability to break through the foolishness that is political partisanship in DC and other state houses across the country. And so when you think about your role as part of this, it's helping people to get a sense of their own agency and power. We're not, we are not, we don't have to be resigned to the world that we have, but we have to get in touch with what it means to get to live into that. I think if there's anything that I can say that's been powerful, really powerful, probably the most important thing I would say about the movements around like Black Lives Matter and other things like that has been their ability to connect everyday people to their own sense of agency. I'm not sitting on the couch and watching the world go past and feeling like I don't have an opportunity to create change. I'm feeling like I'm about to go out and create it. And so our opportunity in this is, you think of every narrative that you put out, how am I helping the person in front of me access their own sense of power and their role in making change, right? And what can we do together to actually make that happen? If you approach every single thing that comes out of your mouth with that intention, it helps all of us. Now I want to give just a couple, I think just a couple findings that I think are coming out of some of the national research on narrative that can be very helpful at this time, that just can help course correct some of the things that I'm seeing in the field that I want us to be most powerful as we think about this work. Let's go to the next slide. When I look at the narrative, the sort of change in the narrative and the research on this, there are a couple things I would say, do's and don'ts. Do not assume that because you've got a whole lot of stories about folks who are about to be evicted, and you've got folks showing up to the table saying, I'm really, we being empathetic about that they are ready to be mobilized to action, right? Or that will happen automatically. Just because people feel sorry for, or they feel like they understand the circumstances under which lots of folks are losing their homes and facing eviction, don't assume, right, that that's enough to bring them out of that, right, to bring them out of the slumber that a lot of us are in, that bystander kind of work. Lots of folks are watching this play out. They're really sad about, I'm so sad about that, but I'm a bystander. So what our responsibility and opportunity is to shift people out of a sense that our work in this space is about charity. We're not giving something to somebody. This is about an investment in our future together. That when we are investing, right, in what it means to provide shelter for every single person, it's an investment for all of us. Remind people of that, because it shifts people out of this very unhelpful, very patronizing narrative that somehow we're giving something to somebody else, that we are somehow, right? It's not that. It's not a bad thing if certainly people feel like they want to help. But I think this narrative around, homelessness or working on this issue as charity is really unhelpful, and we have to unseat that if we want to see change. Let's go to the next slide. As we're thinking about narrative, do not only, I would say, I know that this is a tough time, so we're using our data to talk about how many folks are about to be evicted and what that looks like, how many folks are unsheltered, how many folks are living in their cars and trying to make it to a job every day and hold on to what little income they have, how many, right? So we're using our data to talk about that. And at this moment where we are in so much crisis, I totally get that. Normally I would say, normally people who know me would know that I would say to drop a lot of the crisis language, because it doesn't help to constructively move people forward. In this context, I would say we have to tell some of those stories, because the magnitude of what we're facing is extraordinary, right? In terms of, we haven't seen this in more than a generation. But what I would say to you is, take some of the data, the space that you would normally use to tell those stories, and also talk about the fact that our investment to end homelessness, to make sure everybody has a shelter, right, in our communities, is not just a benefit to those individuals, it's a benefit to all of us, right? Talk about how many people, how many businesses, how many communities could be helped because we're directly addressing this issue in a way that is equitable and in a way that is inclusive. And I would say, and for those of you, I know that talking about race is still a challenge for many of us in this field, but also addressing this in a way that is explicitly anti-racist. We know that folks who are homeless or experiencing homeless are often predominantly in some communities people of color, and we know why that's happening. I would say we have to begin to tell that story in a much more nuanced way, but not only for the benefit of those, right, who are experiencing homelessness, but also the businesses, right, that are operated by people of color, the communities, right, that are also have the same issue. So talk about that, and so tell that story as well. Next slide, please. So another note that I want to just say clearly is don't assume that because people are starting to see homelessness as a systems problem. So this is one where I want to pat us on the back a little bit. Many of us in the homeless space, we've been working very hard to get people to see homelessness not as a failure of individuals who somehow didn't quite make it, but to see this as a systems problem. And we've been pushing that for a long time. And I would say we're starting to see some of the benefit of our hard work there. But don't assume that because now they see homelessness as a systems problem, that they also see the solutions as about systems change, or at least about systems change that works in our favor. In many communities, they see it as a systems problem, right, which is good for us, but they see the quote unquote system solution as calling the police, right, and criminalizing and using the law and order and justice system to criminalize that behavior. That is not helpful. So our opportunity in this space is to keep people focused on the fact that the systems are unjust and that we are undermining people's ability to have safe and affordable shelter, right? That's the challenge. It's not that we have to get this person and that woman off the street. It's that these systems are undermining our ability to make sure that people have what they need. And the more we keep talking about the justice inherent in what we're talking about, I think we can get more folks to lean into this conversation. And I think the last one, Susan, you're going to go to the next slide. The last one I'll say is, don't, this is really important, don't assume because people are having conversations about equity, particularly racial equity right now, that they support solutions to homelessness that center equity. That is to say, folks are talking a good game right now. I see folks having a conversation about racial equity that I have not seen. And I'm excited that the terminology is even crossing people's lips. It's amazing. I love it. However, I hope that you are not fooled by the optics of this conversation, and that you don't assume that because they're having that conversation, that translates into policies. Take the time to position equity as part of the conversation. Talk to people about the fact that, right, not only is it, right, our ability to deal with unjust systems, but also tell the story of why we need to fix our housing system, starting with those without shelter, and how it actually benefits everybody to do so. So it's not just it benefits the folks who are right down the street, but you, the person who's in a single family home and trying to protect that zoning, against, right, folks who are trying to build, permanent housing for folks. It actually benefits you to do so, to lean into this body of work. And I think from my vantage point, when I see Angela Blackwell Glover, you said Policy League, talk about this issue, I think she's probably the most articulate person on this issue that I've seen, where she talks about equity. Equity is not just something that functions to help, right, folks who are most in need. When you have policy that benefits those most in need, it actually helps everybody else along the chain, right? Tell that story, right? That's the thing that folks are missing. You have a stake in this conversation, and it's not just about the quote unquote charity that you're giving to somebody else, it's that it actually benefits all of us to do so. When we're able to position our work in that way, it makes a difference. People lean in differently than they ever have before. Next slide. The last slide I want to share with you just says, I know we're going to have a longer conversation at the end of everybody's remarks on this issue of COVID-19 and how to kind of bridge the gap, or at least to begin to tell that story. I would say, the narratives that need retelling are hard, and, we need practice. We need practice getting out there, telling more stories of hope and aspiration, but also interdependence. And if you notice, all those examples that I just gave, the do's and don'ts, especially the do's, were largely about how to get a wide range of folks in your community to see their relationship to this issue of homelessness. You're not on a separate island from folks who are experiencing perhaps some of the toughest times in their life. Our fates are actually intertwined. And the more you can give stories that talk about that, how we are related, that your health depends on mine, right? My health depends on yours. Your housing depends on me, right? And my housing stability also depends on yours, right? And when you start to tell stories that help people to think about the interdependence, the real independence, we have a diverse economy that relates our work in so many different ways, but we don't talk about it in that way. The fact that we actually need each other, right? That we get a different conversation. And so I'm hoping that at the end of this call, we're going to talk about the kind of stories that need retelling, the stories of interdependence that we are practicing in our communities, that we can begin to reinforce for each other because they help us to reinforce what systems are at work and what those systems need to thrive in order to reinforce the interdependence that we actually that shapes our communities. So I'm going to stop there. I'm anxious to hear my other colleagues on the call, but I think this is so important that we get this narrative work right, and I'm so glad to have been invited to share some of those learnings with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm hoping we have Theo who joined. Perfect, perfect. All right, Theo, you want to kick it off?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Hello?
can. Yes.
Oh, okay. So I'm next. It's a tough act to follow by Dr. Manuel. And then we'll tell my host podcast, Reaching Out. And what Out is getting the story of the in-the-house community out there through their own words and their own experiences. Well, who's the better to talk about being houseless or unhoused or homeless or whatever name you want to use than the unhoused themselves? Lived experience trumps over sometimes the people that are making the decisions for the unhoused community. They are the ones that are on the front lines, boots on the ground, and can tell you about the policies that are effective or not effective or are harmful in unintended ways or intended ways. My story begins a little bit different. I was an educator. I was a person working, and the Great Recession happened, and the confluence of events. I also have some illnesses, particularly diabetic, heart issues, and I got ill and was into a coma for a few weeks. And when I came to, of course, it was also embarrassing to have the incident happen while I was speaking. As of course, that provided a quandary for me. I had to heal and I had to pay rent. I had to heal and I had to be able to eat. And it became a battle where which one would it be to take the medication, go to the therapy. I didn't have any family support to be able to recover or stay at their place to do the necessary things that I needed to do. So bad circumstances won out. But there were in the many people that I encountered, I just didn't fall into the street right away. They tried everything they can to try to help me out. I did couch commitments, slept on the floor. I had a little money. I went hotel to hotel. I slept into the car. I've done it all, every facet of home being unhoused. Slept on the bus, the train, abandoned buildings, garbage can, behind the garbage can, park, near the bridge, subway, bridges, freeways, you name it. So I could say I have some experience of that over 7 years. I've had experiences of it dealing with the police harassment, the public antipathy, the messaging that is presented as being unhoused. There's a few things that Dr. Manuel talked about that plays into how I do the podcast from my own lens is because for so often people believe the unhoused are unhoused by bad choices, and that there should be some kind of punishment for them to learn their lessons to get out of the situation so they won't become unhoused again. But it's a difficult narrative because we have it on a wider scale. We have it pumped out by the police, business improvement district, the city council behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. And so it is very difficult when you're trying to tell people that, there's nothing I did wrong and you should be penalizing people that have life happen to them. And it's very difficult for us to shake that. And to that end, when we deal with drug usage and mental maladies that are posed with some of the house community, we look at it as a blame shame kind of endeavor. Uh, so to that end, I felt that getting the conversation with them, explaining
Oh,
uh,
Theo, we're starting to lose you on volume. Can you?
I got it at the top of my can.
Okay, perfect. Can hear you a little bit better now.
So to that end, I felt that going to the different places of the unhoused communities and getting their stories in their own words, um, and trying to find the resources that can help them in the way that they want to be helped. One of the things I always ask is what is the best way for us to help you? Because unhoused people are over 60,000 of them in California, and they all have different needs. Like some are physically disabled, they want some help with getting the medical equipment that was taken during a court or city ordered sweep. Some of them want to be cleaned with domestic abuse slaves, or some of them want to go into Project Room Key. Some of them don't want to go in Project Room Key. Some of them want to be in the RV and in safe parking spots. Some of them need just help getting back to where their family is, but they can't due to maybe COVID-19 or due to financial issues as well. So um, I don't want to belabor the point. The long and short of the story is I had too many well-meaning people try to blame and shame me in my position, and people still do. I try to insinuate that being unhoused, you can just get yourself up. You're so educated. Why can't you do this? Why can't you just get a job? And I explained to them that doing a podcast is a job, but the second thing we must understand too, having a host of illnesses is not exactly what employees look for, because that cuts down on productivity time. And then what if I had another attack or a complication? Then I'm not exactly really a person that they would want to continue to have me on, which I understand too, because I wouldn't want to be in a position where I have to have a relapse or anything of that nature. I thank you all for inviting me, and I hope we are truly get to the light of understanding about this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Theo. And I apologize. I know we had some volume issues there. We'll see if there's anything that we can do to adjust the volume with the recording, and we will let you know as well. But thank you so much, Theo. And now we will hand it off to Mark.
Hey, hopefully you can all hear me, and whatever you selected, now I can't see the slides. So open system preferences. I have to, another system preference thing. Hold on. Maybe this will give me the camera. You guys are all, no, I'm not going to be able to do the slides. It's not going to let me. We should have proofed this before. So if you want to take back where we were, sorry about this. Hey, this is going to be fun. We have technical difficulties. Welcome to 2020. Hey, you're all lucky. I'm the video guy and I couldn't get the video to work. So you don't get to see me today, and I apologize. Hardly Normal is my personal Twitter, Invisible People on Twitter and Instagram, and invisiblepeople.tv is the website. Next. And we're going to go through these pretty fast. Oh, formatting didn't work. This is supposed to be black. So right there in the middle of this, oh my gosh. I kind of don't really know what to do because the text is not showing. More technical difficulties. So let me, if I can open it up myself on here. So you're doing something here. I don't know what you're doing. Yeah. See, it's black. There we go. Woohoo! All right. The stereotypes of poor people in the United States are among the most negative prejudices that we have. And people basically view particularly homeless people as having no redeeming qualities. Having no redeeming qualities. I think that's so important because as people trying to, do messaging, it's only human that we believe everybody's like us. We love homeless people. Everybody should be. And we could argue about whether this is true or not, but the struggles that we have to get housing pretty much validates. Next, please. I'm going to go through these pretty quick. This next section is the dominant messages. These are the messages that the public, media, nonprofits, and politicians get. So these are the messages that people get right now. The dominant messaging is street homelessness they see with their own eyes. You can do a newspaper article or a YouTube video, but this is what they're going to believe. Next. Nonprofits, we like to show trophies. That's what I call. I help house this woman. I took this photo. And it's a good thing. We have to validate the work. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but this is the messaging people receive. We're showing trophies. Next. This is a full-page ad a PR advocacy campaign Los Angeles did when there was a 3% drop in homelessness. And again, people are seeing with their own eyes homelessness growing, yet here they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this ad that reinforces something that is not necessarily true and creates disconnect. I'm for spending money on advertising. There was a missed opportunity here. They should have told stories of people being placed into permanent supportive housing. The data, the numbers do nothing. And behind the scenes, the people that did this were under political pressure. They knew that this was going to backfire, but they launched it anyways. Next, please. And, I haven't seen it recently, but USICH was claiming 78 communities in 3 states have ended veterans homelessness. There's another organization that are saying 9 communities have ended veterans homelessness. Which is it? Solutions messaging may not work because, especially now with what's going on with the coronavirus, people don't believe homeless can be ended. So when you're saying 78 communities and 3 entire states have ended veterans homelessness, people do not believe it. Next, please. Rescue missions, faith-based organizations drop millions of pieces of direct mail into mailboxes, all with the messaging, only $2.05 and you can end homelessness. Homeless people, that's needs-based images, and it shows homeless people as just needing a meal. So you can solve homelessness with just needing a meal. And again, these are the messages that the public receives. You might not give to these rescue missions, but by opening your mailbox, you're seeing and receiving this message. Next, please. Governments like to show data. Next, please. Media shows chronic homelessness most of the time. There's been a shift in homelessness. Whoa, go back. Media, there's been a shift in what the media has been reporting, both some of it good, some of it bad, but typically media focuses on the negative. Next, please. And what is happening, I lack of a better term, there is social media accounts growing in Austin, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles that are showing they're not only growing in the number of these accounts, but they're also growing in their support and their following. And this is what the people are seeing. Next slide, please. And this messaging, I think it's horrible, but this messaging is growing. And these communities are rallying You know, they call homeless people vagrants. This message right here is getting louder. Next, please. These are videos. Now, most of us, I'm telling you, if you're not doing video in your storytelling, you need to. Americans consume video over any other form of communication. And here, the homeless haters. Now, this woman on the right, she should have never been interviewed. She should have never been in front of a camera. But they are putting homeless people with severe mental illness, severe drug addiction, and it's reaching people. And these messages are being received by the public and politicians. Next, please. Then you have celebrities who, you know, Dr. Drew publicly says the affordable housing crisis is a hoax. Like them, love them, hate them. You know what? He has millions of followers and they are receiving this messages. So all this are the messages that the public receives, politicians receive on homelessness, all of it. Combine it all, that is what people receive about homelessness. Next slide, please. So how do you cut through this? How do you cut through all those mixed messages and all the other messages that people receive? Next slide, please. First, you establish what is success to you. And what I mean by this is, are you trying to get volunteers? Are you trying to create advocacy? Are you trying to push politicians to affect policy change? Are you working for donations? What is success for you? Next slide, please. And then you work backwards. You figure out what it is that you want, that, you know, action item, and you work backwards. Next slide, please. You have to understand that nothing appeals to everybody. One thing that we do in messaging, and it's not just a nonprofit thing, businesses do it too, is we try to reach everybody. You have to reach everybody. We got to be on TikTok. We got to be there. We got to do this. No, you have to segment out your audiences. Next slide, please. In the homeless messaging, to me, there are four audiences: politicians, the general public, nonprofits, all of us, and media. These are the four dominant audiences that whatever your goal is, whatever you're trying to do with your messaging campaign, you're trying to reach somebody here. And, you know, some of them cross over. For instance, you know, media can influence politicians, the general public can influence politicians. So some of them cross over. Next slide, please. For invisible people, we focus on the general public. And I segmented out a little more. So there's people that hate homeless people. They're never going to change their mind. Well, that's a waste of resources trying to change their mind, because it's just not going to happen. And then there's all of you, and you guys are wonderful, and you already love homeless people. So it doesn't make a lot of sense trying to message to you guys. You already have an affinity for homeless people. So for invisible people, we try to message to the people that are on the fence. We segmented it out a little more, young adults, because there's research that shows young adults, homelessness is the third most important cause to young adults. But we segment out of all the different audiences, we try to reach people who are in the middle. Next slide, please. This right here, if you can memorize it, this is the key to a successful messaging campaign. You first research who's the audience, who are the people that you want to reach, where are they, how do they communicate, how can you reach them. You tell a good story with a clear call to action. I'm going to repeat this because right here, this slide, this is it. Research audience, research the messaging, see what moves the audience, tell a good story, and have a clear call to action. Next slide, please. That foundation, or that model, that strategy, is what Invisible People use. So the city of Los Angeles brought us in for Prop HHH and Measure H for both of them. If you're not aware, Prop HHH raised property taxes, and Measure H was for raising sales tax, both to help fight homelessness in Los Angeles. Next slide, please. And there was a lot of moving parts. There's door knocking and in-person events and everything else. Invisible People was the digital campaign for Prop HHH and Measure H. And it's the first time that I know of where stories of homeless people, not just formerly homeless people, both have a place, were used in such a significant way. And 7 of the top 10 most popular posts came from Invisible People, far above celebrity video that was produced and far above the LA Times. And LA Times at the time had 2.2 million Twitter followers. At the time, I think I had 40 million Twitter followers. 40,000 Twitter followers. I didn't have 40 million, sorry. What this shows is the personal stories of homeless people when targeted, because we researched the audience, we researched what messaging would move people, and then I focused on posting those messages. It moved people to go to vote to pass both Prop HH and Measure H. Next slide, please. The good, the bad, the ugly. One thing nonprofits do, businesses do, is we only want to focus on the good. And what happens is, to create trust, you have to be authentic. The world knows that life isn't perfect. Everything doesn't happen great. So, you don't want to be naked as a church mouse. The CIA should not be sharing messaging about where their spies are, but you need to be very conscious. At least we are in Invisible People. We share stories of the crisis, but we also share stories of the solutions. We mix it up so that there's balance, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And to help, dramatize that a little bit. Next slide, please. How many of you have seen Extreme Makeover Home Edition? I'm sure everybody, if I could see you, you're probably raising your hand. How long is this segment? Move the bus, about 5 minutes, right? The end part, the good part, is 5 minutes of the show. Next slide, please. The majority of the show is drama. Humans are attracted to drama. And again, you have to be very selective and very conscious of what you're sharing publicly as your messaging. But you can use being authentic as a strategy to build trust. If you're just saying everything's great, wow, we're ending homelessness. What? We're ending homelessness, and the public is seeing, tent camps growing, you're creating distrust. But if you're honest and you're showing, hey, we're really working hard, we're doing better than we ever have, but we need your help because homelessness is growing, you're going to build trust. Next slide, please. This is the outpost strategy, and Chris Brogan is the first person that came up with it. And I use this in a lot of my nonprofit strategies and advocacy strategies. And I think it's so very important because we get so used to posting on Twitter, or posting on LinkedIn, and posting on YouTube. You have to drive people into your website. Consider your website your home base. That's where you're going to collect emails. And emails are the only medium you can control. Facebook can make a change tomorrow and everything goes bye-bye. Twitter makes a change tomorrow and everything that you've worked for is gone. You can control email. And you use social media to bring people in, to build your email list, to give volunteers, to sign petitions, to contact legislators, or whatever it is. Remember, working backwards, whatever it is that you want the audience to do. So often in social media strategy, people just post on Facebook. Hey, we're just going to share on Facebook. No, you need to bring people back into your website. You have to be very conscious about the outpost strategy. Next slide, please. How many of you have a relative or maybe a coworker or a friend who just talks about themselves, right? So many nonprofit, look at us, volunteer, look at us, volunteer, donate, look at us, look at what we're doing. We're ending homelessness. Come volunteer, look at us, come volunteer, look at us, come sign a petition. People detach from that. You know, just like that person that you know who is always talking about themselves, you probably walk into the next room. That's what happens on social media. People stop listening to you. So Chris Brogan, again, he says this is great, is that other people, I mean, nobody's gonna blow your horn like you are. So talk about yourself, but even it out by talking about other people just as much. And one of Invisible People's earliest strategies, I mean, we're in Los Angeles. It's, you know, the home of mega nonprofits in the homeless sector who didn't talk about each other. And here I am talking about all of them. And they started talking about me. And that was a strategy for growth. There's so much, this is a really brief, abbreviated messaging presentation. I'm more than willing to unpack most of this, like the law of reciprocity, at a later time or individually if you like. Next slide, please. Don't be boring. So many advocacy campaigns, so many you know, nonprofit campaigns are just, you know, they put me to sleep. Oh my gosh. Next slide, please. No one wants to hear from your executive director. Next slide, hit the space bar or whatever it is. No one wants to hear from your CEO. There's a place for that, yes, maybe your board of directors or whatever. The first thing that we've got to interview, no, interview the people you're helping, the people that you're affecting change, or the people that are at risk of being homeless, or that you are trying to help. Those are the stories. No one wants to hear from your executive director. And if you're an executive director, step back. It's the stories of the people that you're helping that create the most change. Next slide, please. One thing we do in the homeless sector that drives me insane, and I'm sure it's every sector, is we talk to ourselves. And in Invisible People, our strategy is to reach the general public outside of the social services sector. So I love all you guys, and we publish daily news on Apple News and Google News, and we have a large YouTube following, but I'm not trying to reach you. And I am very strategic on working to reach new networks. Next slide, please. We've worked with Haynes, Ford. Our website, our YouTube videos were on the Ford Motor Company website for 2 years. They saw in real time. My iPhone sunk to the Ford Motor Company website for 2 years. Nobody's done that. With Pepsi and different things. This was a campaign we did with Haynes where we shipped 3 smartphones to 3 homeless people who recorded a day in their life for Instagram stories, and then Haynes put money behind the advertising, and we reached 10 million kids. You guys, we just did a campaign with Haynes. If COVID hadn't hit, we were doing campaigns with Kia and a bunch of other brands. But you know, when I work with brands, the first thing that has to be agreed upon is that there has to be some kind of education and awareness campaign component that goes along with it. And it is so important. And I only bring this up not to pat myself on the back, but to use as an example that you have to think about getting outside of the echo chamber. So, you know, I hate sports. I really do. So if the article has a headline about baseball or football, I don't read it. So movies about homelessness are not seen by the people that need to see them. The articles and newspaper articles are rarely seen because people that don't like homeless people aren't going to read them. So you have to be very conscious and strategic on figuring out ways of reaching new networks. Next slide, please. We like data. We like statistics, but you know what? That breakfast cereal you ate this morning, you probably made the decision because it tastes good or because some marketing campaign made you feel good about it. You probably didn't look at the label. So here, you know, data alone, numbers, has a 5 to 10% retention. Now you mix that data with a photo and you have 25% retention. Now tell a story with a photo and you're going to have 65 to 70% retention. A key, something I repeat to myself every day is don't market to yourself. Don't market to yourself. So you might think you like data. You might think you like numbers, and there is a place for data and numbers. But if you're trying to message change, data and numbers don't work that well. And you have to be very conscious of that. Next slide, please. Listen to your community, listen to your audience, listen to homeless people, listen to the people that you've housed, listen to your supporters, your donors, listen to the people that are NIMBYs, listen to what's going on around you. I set up we have an online support group for homeless people that I'm constantly listening, and I do a Sunday night live stream that we don't publicize. It's just to the YouTube community, to our supporters, and I'm listening to them constantly, and they will ask, like for instance, they ask for longer interviews. So now I do longer interviews. Listen to your community, listen. Don't market to yourself. So often an executive director and a marketing person and maybe a web designer will sit in an office and you all decide, oh, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this campaign. And none of you go out and listen to the people you're trying to reach, and then you wonder why does it fail? So listen, next slide, please. So often, and this is more in the lens of criminalization, but it's really, you know, can fit all your messaging. And so often I see advocates showing photos and sharing how horrible it is that sanitation is throwing tents away, right? It is horrible. I hate it. I think it's extremely horrible. But this is a big messaging that a lot of the advocates, especially in the criminalization space, continue to share. But you have to understand, a lot of people support this. A lot of people want tents gone. They don't want homeless encampments there. So even though we're saying this is bad, this is horrible, they're applauding. Great, those tents, let's get rid of them. Next slide, please. You have to put people in the tents. Don't just show tents are being thrown away. Show that people's lives are being destroyed. Now, for invisible people, this is Rocky. Rocky is now in housing thanks to LA Family Housing. We actually have a VR movie that would have won Tribeca, where Rocky plays herself. She was homeless at the time. It's with Invisible People and Oculus, which is Facebook. And it will be out by the end of the year. But, you know, I try not to show needs-based images. So you see Rocky smiling. Yes, she's in front of her tent, but I don't want to give the impression that she's a helpless homeless person. She's not. She's a very, very strong woman. But the point is, when you're messaging like I said, criminalization of tents being thrown away into, dumpsters or sanitation or police and all this. You have to humanize it. You have to show the person that is having their life disrupted and what it means to them, and how it has hindered their progress into getting off the streets. Next slide, please. So here, invisible people. I'm unemployed. I don't have, we get almost no funding, right? We get funding from private individuals. 1,249,000 views. 1 million views. People have heard Rocky's story. 1 million views. And now Rocky's story is going to be a major VR movie release with Facebook. Again, other networks. I'm taking Rocky's story about criminalization. This whole VR film is about criminalization, and millions of people are going to not just meet Rocky, they're going to experience it. Next slide, please. The reason I use YouTube is 73% of the US adults use YouTube, while 68% use Facebook. Facebook is pay to play. In your digital strategy, if you don't put money in, nobody sees your Facebook video or your Facebook post. You have to pay for people to see it. There's a little bit of organic reach, but it's not. We, invisible people, we had 26 million views, 26 million, 16 million of them in the last month were unique, brand new people who had never watched a video on our website before. 16 million in 30 days who had never touched homelessness through our website before. How much money? Zero. I don't have money. Can you imagine if we had money to do more? But that is why we use YouTube. And why I bring this up is that so many nonprofits are doing Facebook or Instagram, and they're missing the opportunity of YouTube. And that's where people are. So everything I've taught here, work backwards, figure out where the people are. That's where young adults are, and use that as part of your strategy. Bam. Next slide, please. And I'll end with this. Jessica Gottlieb is the Motrin mom. She is a very influential influencer in the San Fernando Valley. We were talking about something online, and she shared this. And behind the scenes, when we were doing Prop HHH and Measure H, nobody went, remember how I said listening? Nobody went and asked the people that hated homeless people what they thought to be able to craft messaging, right? You're talking to yourself. You gotta know what, you gotta establish benchmarks of how this messaging is going to change and what messaging to use. This is really, in a short amount of time, this one statement by Jessica: people work hard for their homes and resent the idea of someone getting one for free. You're not, it's so often I see videos produced or messaging produced where we're showing, look at all the free stuff the homeless people get. Most recently is Project Roomkey. I saw nonprofits in Los Angeles. They're getting 3 meals a day. They've got showers. Now, I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. I bet you do too. But the change that you want to see in the public and politicians, you're reinforcing. They're getting free stuff. And you got to imagine, most people are unemployed because of COVID. They are in food banks for the first time. You've seen the lines of the food banks, and people are messaging homeless people are getting 3 meals a day for free. That's going to backfire. So you have to think about personal benefit. This is, Jessica continues, this is mostly because people are assholes and they can't understand, go back please. And they can't understand mental illness, cycles of poverty, being a veteran, or just bad luck. So stop talking to folks about housing. Talk to them about how you'll make their lives better by getting the homeless people away from them, since that's what they really care about. And I'm not saying don't stop talking about housing. I think housing is something that is very important, and we have to reinforce. But what I am saying is that you have to look at messaging as personal benefit. People are motivated by what's in it for them and what may make them feel guilty or what may make them feel happy. Back to what's in it for them. So when you're messaging homelessness, when you're messaging eviction, when you're messaging, broken criminal justice system, foster care, racism, or all these things, that we need to message, you have to look at your audience that you're trying to reach, and you have to work backwards and figure out what is the messaging that will motivate them, that will change them, that will get them to take that call to action that we want, that will help move the needle and help fight homelessness. Last slide, please. And that's me. So Mark Horvath, Hardly Normal on Twitter, at Hardly Invisible People on Twitter and Instagram, and invisiblepeople.tv. We have the only space on the internet where young adults can quickly and easily learn about homelessness. We do daily journalism, often written by homeless people and people with lived experience. Also on, if you're Apple News person, we're there. Google News, we're there. We do individuals, first-person storytelling, now doing mini documentaries, and we have a very robust advocacy platform where we're pushing politicians to change policy to help end homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to everyone. I think as I was sitting there, I just could have listened to this hour, and that could have replaced my first 3, 4, 5 years of nonprofit communications and fundraising. It's really, really incredible things and tips that you all have shared. So one question I want to cover first and foremost for all of you is how do we then take all of this and make it really specific to this moment, specifically to the COVID crisis, to the reckoning with racial injustice that we're having across the country. And during that time, how do you bring attention to amplified needs of people, such as the elevated risk of COVID or health concerns, without feeding into the existing stigmas that all of you have mentioned as part of the narratives? Does anyone want to take that on first?
Can I say something?
Can barely hear you, Theo.
That's fine.
If you can type it in the chat.
No, that's okay. Because I don't have the volume thing, and I'm horrible typer, so I'll just hold off on that.
So I can start, but it's also building on what Dr. Said earlier, which is that I do think that this time has provided a moment when we are the issue of homelessness, it has revealed our interdependence, and where we are being faced with public health doctors just in the normal course of other news events. So that something that happened, for example, in San Francisco was when the mayor issued oh, hey, we're going to be housing people who are homeless in the George Moscone Center, and here's an enormous dormitory-like setting with cots less than 6 feet away from each other. There was such a visceral reaction to that. Is inappropriate. That's going to lead to the spread of COVID, and people got that in a way with just an image, and that led to the advocacy, to the advocate calls for what about these hotel rooms, this Project Room Key that we talked about. So that was a moment when people were able to take what everyone's hearing from public health officials and translate that in a way to address that situation. So actually COVID provided an opportunity for that.
Yeah, and I think if I can jump in and piggyback off what Kate said, I think to our point, this is an incredible moment for us to be thinking about this. And I think even in the midst of a global pandemic around health, there are some opportunities for us to not only just change the narrative, but connect, we're trying to say, more forcefully to other folks. One of the issues that seems really important to me is that, during the course of this pandemic, lots of local and state jurisdictions figured out they turned on a dime, right? They figured out that they had to make some real big adjustments very quickly to address the fact that people were experiencing homelessness and were more likely then to be exposed to COVID-19. And they start thinking outside of the box. They start putting people in hotels and all the stuff that Kate, you were just talking about. And so now what's really interesting is now that some of those resources are wearing down and they don't have as much funding as they had at the very beginning, and they're getting tired of this conversation, they want to go back to where we were before. And I think, one of the things that we have to stand firm in is we're not going back. Right? You can't tell us in the middle of a global pandemic that you have resources. You can turn on a dime, be nimble, figure it out. And now all of a sudden that when it's inconvenient, when some of those resources are wearing down, that we don't have any more resources, we can't figure it out. Oh, it's too hard. It's not too hard. When you need to get those stimulus checks out, you got them out right away. So we know you know how to do it. Right? This is not a fact that we don't know how, we can't do it. This is about political will. And we can call people to the carpet. Right, you know how to do it because it was a matter of strategic importance to the region or to the state. You figured out how to do it quickly, and I think we have to hold people's feet to the fire along those lines. The second thing is I'm hoping that people aren't getting caught in the quagmire between legislators saying, we're going to address some of the immediate needs around this issue, but we're not going to think long term. They're shifting from that long term funding to kind of immediate relief. And I think we have to hold them to the fire of both and. We can walk and chew gum, right? We can both meet the needs of folks, the immediate need of what we're seeing happening in the street and the housing needs for a whole range of folks, and also think about the long-term needs of our community. Like if you can, as a legislator, as a policymaker, as a planning department, if you can't do both those things, you don't need to be in that seat. And we'll make sure that for the next election, you are not there. Right? That is the definition of being a good, I would say, adaptive leader, right? And so that's another thing in our messaging, holding folks' feet to the fire. We can do both things, and if you can't, then you don't need to be in that role. And we need to get some folks in office who can. And then the third thing I would just say is, to the last speaker's point, it just, folks, it's interesting. There's a cognitive aspect to this issue of narrative around homelessness. Jennifer Eberhard, who's at Stanford, and some of her colleagues there who do cognitive research on this issue have done some amazing research just around, what happens when people see and see directly, people who are in the street and who are experiencing homelessness. And what they found is that the part of the brain that lights up when you see another person, when you see, your brain's ability to discern whether you're seeing an inanimate object versus a human being, a person, that part of the brain that lights up, when people see someone who they perceive as homeless, that part of the brain doesn't light up anymore. There's a cognitive thing that's happening here. It's that people literally have to shut that part of the brain off that recognizes another human being in order to walk past them and not respond, right? So a part of the work that I think we're all talking about, and the last speaker was really trying to push very, very explicitly, was we gotta light that part of the brain up for people again, right? This is not like an inanimate object that you walk past and you pretend like it's a bench that doesn't move and breathe and have needs like anybody else. And so part of that is helping folks connect to the humanity of other folks. And I know that for this audience, lots of us have been in that space, but I think, the idea that we have to begin to try new ways of doing that because we know what's happening cognitively for people is really important. If you're not helping people to see the humanity of the folks that you're working with and for and on behalf of, then we're not ever going to shift the narrative in terms of having people understand what it means to address people's human needs and be thoughtful about that. So in this moment, it just feels like there is a real opportunity to do that because so many Americans are at that moment where they never thought they would be in a position where they had to think about where they were going to live and where their own housing circumstances are a little bit precarious, and they're getting nervous about the mortgage payment, they're getting nervous about the rent payment, and they never thought they'd be in that position. And now they're thinking about what would happen if mommy doesn't get a job or daddy doesn't find something else to do. Would we be on the street? Would we be like the person, would we be in that position? That's the moment to have this broader national conversation and to engage people. Yeah, you got a job today, but you could be that very person tomorrow if you don't lean into what it means to fix the systems that are inherently inequitable, unsustainable, and racist, period.
And I want to sort of, well, I'll take another question. Well, no, I want to, this is an important point, and this is something that Dr. Manuel said and Mark said as well, which is that, it's important for us to give answers to people. And I think we, I especially heard that in Tiffany's presentation, that we can't just be all, throwing up our hands, and that's at least what we're trying to do at TJC, is to sort of give the legislators the answers, but also showcase and highlight the ones, hey, this legislator has an answer now, and this is like legislation that's, in front of a committee now. There are people acting on this or not acting on this, and we need to hold them accountable or, or push them in some way. But one thing that I want to say that is important to do is, and it's very similar to what Mark said, which is, who's your audience? And what we try to always do is to talk about it in terms of power mapping. Like, who is the power, who has the power to fix this? So is it sweeps? Okay, then that's the police and that's your local government, and we need to, okay, and I feel that sometimes, especially in this country, because everything becomes like national, like, let's talk about President Trump and homelessness. Well, actually, those decisions are made at the local level and they're made at the state level. So how do we hold Gavin Newsom or Governor Cuomo, who won't, sign this eviction, moratorium extension? Like, how do we power map that? So whatever you see, the problem is make sure that you power map first, because those people are your audience. That's, they're intimately connected.
Can I just piggyback off that, Kate? I just want to say that is absolutely right. And the work that I do, that's one of the first things I have people do. I don't call it power mapping, but essentially that's what it is. I call it the idea that you have to understand where the locus of power for the things that you want to shift. The worst thing in the world is to have a message with a call to action that's targeted to the wrong folks. And I see that all the time. You want to change, you see people in the street, and then you want to go run off and talk to, rail against Trump or rail against the government. It's like, that's not right. That's not the right. You're talking to the wrong folks. They don't have the power to tell you yes, right? They don't have the power to give you what you're asking for. So be very clear that you understand who has the power to do that. And so I would just really reinforce that. But the other thing that does in terms of narrative is, when most folks don't, I was saying about in my presentation on agency, most folks don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. They don't know who's responsible for different things. The only folks they know are the police. Call the police. So the police get called for everything, right? As we all know, it's very unfortunate circumstances. But that's all they know. And so it's our responsibility to give them other levers of power to use, right? Here's who you call, here's who you tap, here's who we're working with. So they see other levers, right, that they can use to affect change. And it's our responsibility to equip folks with that. Otherwise, they won't have it. So absolutely, I want to co-sign that.
Great, thank you both. Mark, is there anything you wanted to add to this question before I move on?
No, I think they covered it quite well. I just, I see another question in there that I was itching to answer before you end the thing.
Sure. So I'm actually going to hit on that. So we have a whole lot of questions, and I want to be mindful of the fact that we are almost at a full hour and a half. So we're writing all of these down, and we'll connect. The Law Center and the panelists will connect and try and reach out after the fact, and do some follow up. So definitely, thank you for the almost 500 of you who've stuck with us thus far. Before we do sign off, related. So there's been a couple of questions now.
Can I answer that question?
Yes, well, it's
Well,
part of, yes,
okay,
it's
okay,
all
okay,
wrapped
okay,
together.
great.
It's all wrapped together. So there's been a bunch of questions essentially saying, how do you tell stories without exploiting the people that those stories are about, and how do you find the line between humanizing and victimizing when you're telling those stories and those narratives? So Mark, do you want to start?
Sure, sure. And the question that was written was, and I'll tie it all in. How do you approach compensation for those stories who you're using? And this is interesting, and it's, you know, the nonprofit sector. It's not just the homeless sector. Is, you know, stories are used for fundraising. Stories are used for advocacy. So with invisible people, the stories that we use on our YouTube channel, the homeless person retains the rights to that video, meaning they can contact me at any time and I will remove that video. They are also raw and unedited, meaning it's never spun for any other agenda. It's very clear, the motivations, they know exactly, you know, what the video is being used for. And I give them a card that has information for our online support group and how to reach me. But, you know, out of 900 videos, about 5 people have contacted me. And what's really interesting is they all will say, you know, my life changed. I don't want the video up, but I really love that you gave me a chance to tell my story. Now, like for Theo and for when I need somebody to sign over their rights, and if you're asking somebody to sign over a waiver, and if you're a nonprofit communicator, chances are you are, and that's a good practice, pay them. Pay them cash money. You're making money off them, pay them. So like with Theo, because we were doing a mini documentary that's going to be edited and I had to have Theo sign a release, I paid him what I would pay an actor. Rocky in our VR movie, she was paid at what an actor would be paid, not what a homeless person would be paid, what an actor. All the homeless people in our movie were paid what actors would be paid. So I'm very adamant on that because so often we ask homeless people to sign over their rights and we don't compensate them and then we go and use it. And I'm sure everybody has good intentions and you need to raise money and you need advocacy. But you know, that's where I draw the line. Now there's other protocols behind the scenes that we use to ensure nobody gets hurt. But to go on to what you asked, there is a fine line. And if you are going into storytelling with the right motivations and you're very clear with that person, and that could be an executive director, a movie star, whatever. You know, it's not just homeless people. We tell stories and we often use a camera or write them down. Whatever it is, if you are very clear how that story is going to be used and you give them the decision to make it, you know, to make that decision, the permission, then it's perfectly fine. I mean, you have to have some ethics going in to make sure it's ethical. The other thing that, you know, and I get it. So what needs to happen is communications people are always going, we need stories, we need stories. And programs people are going, we need to protect our people, we need to protect our people, right? That's a healthy tension. That actually, because if communications people aren't looking for stories and program people aren't protecting their people, something is wrong. And that tension, that healthy tension mixed with protocols will ensure that you're not exploiting anybody. It will ensure, but you also have to understand that, and I never saw this going in when I started Invisible People's work. the power of story and empowering somebody to share their own story to millions of people. There's a woman, Brenda, homeless in New York City. She is 60 years old. She writes, she answers everybody's comment on the video. She interacts with them, creating community. And I have stories and stories about that. Several people have gone and actually changed their lives because somebody asked them, wow, can you share your story? And they started getting self-worth. So while we're looking at being protective, and that's important, we also have to be very conscious that homeless people will want to tell their stories. And also you have this power dynamic where they're getting food and they're getting housing, and this is a way for them to get back. And so often, but never force it. Always make sure there's protocols to be safe. Make sure that everything is clear and concise. I put it in writing and verbally. I try to stay in touch with as many as possible. And if you're getting a waiver sign, pay them. Pay them not what you would pay a homeless person, but pay them what you would pay that vocation, or, in this case, an actor.
I just like to co-sign that and say, absolutely. I think too often to your point, we have a lot of privilege and power, and we don't often think of our own privilege, even as folks who care about what's happening to other people in this way. And so I thank you so much, Mark, for sharing that. And I would say I have to jump to another call, but I want to just thank the presenters. I mean, this was fantastic, and just the opportunity of folks on the call who are doing the work in this moment is so important. My sense is, really to take a moment, breathe, because there's so much going on right now. We can forget we're running so fast, we can just forget to breathe, right? You are on the right side of history. The moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. We're getting there. Just breathe and keep going. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Absolutely. Great. Well, we are over again. We've seen so many notes asking to continue this conversation. So we will definitely do it as much as we can, continue the conversation as much as possible. We'll try and reach out to all of you and share some of these questions on social media. So thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much. Have a great one.